So just a little bit about QGive before we get started. We are an online fundraising platform, and we provide digital fundraising tools to over 6,500 nonprofits throughout the United States and Canada. So we offer donation forms, event registration forms, auction tools, and so much more. And QGive recently joined forces with Bloomerang to provide an all-in-one giving platform. It's super exciting. It puts relationships at the heart of your fundraising. And so if you're curious about what that looks like, or you just want to learn a bit more, I encourage you to reach out or head to the QGive or Bloomerang website. And so with all of that out of the way, I am super excited to hand it over to Cherian so we can talk about AI and fundraising.
Thank you so much. And as we just noticed in the chat, there are a bunch of people that have AI note takers in here, which is great. I love that. We'll talk about that in a hot second. But thank you all for being here. If you are on the West Coast like I am, or close to the coast, it's morning time still. But for those of you that are late afternoon on the East Coast or elsewhere in the world, just thank you so much for being here. I know that this is a really hot topic, and and surprisingly, as Wendy and I were talking about in the green room earlier, more exciting than donor psychology and year-end fundraising that we did with QGive last year. So what I want to do is really demystify what does this look like inside of your organizations, and talk about many of the very practical use cases. So as Wendy mentioned, not only will this session be recorded, but you will have complete access to the slides. What I'd love for you to do is more pay attention to the work that we're doing. I'm going to do a little show and tell, what I call the robot petting zoo in a moment, to kind of show you some of the tools that I have been using as a fundraiser and continue to use, and how they affect the work that I'm doing or my teams are doing. But I also just want you to kind of take it all in and then really think about, what does this mean from a practical perspective, but also an ethical perspective in your organization. And we're going to touch on that for just a little bit, but I apologize in advance that we're not going to spend a ton of time on that, even though it is very, very important to me. I am a member of AFP, and ethics is really important to me. I'm actually on the board of the Association of Fundraising Professionals on the global board, so this is really important to me. However, I did an hour-long presentation at the QGive conference at the beginning of the year, and that's a lot of content. So if you're interested in that, feel free to reach out and we can talk more about that. But don't hear what I'm not saying, which is that there are critical aspects of making sure that you're implementing the use of AI very carefully, very thoughtfully, and very ethically. So with that in mind, let's jump into kind of what the issues are inside of our sector. And so what I want to start by framing for you is that in the for-profit world, there has been this concept called a connected software revolution. And there are software solutions that are out there that holistically present information to their users. And again, there are examples of this like HubSpot and Salesforce that really hypercharge efficiency and fuel strategic decision making, because the systems that we use don't often talk to each other. They don't have all of the information. And so even with the best platforms that are out there that are designed for nonprofit use, you still have pieces that you have to do separately. Now, what I'm really excited about with the combination of Bloomerang and QGive is a growing kind of connection between those different pieces that allow you to use all of your data in one spot. But this is rather rare in the grand scheme of things. And I know that some of you might be HubSpot customers or Salesforce customers or Bloomerang QGive customers, but many of you may not be. And so what I want to sort of frame for you is, where is AI coming into our market? Where is it coming into our sector? And part of that is there are more nonprofit organizations in the US and Canada in particular. I know that we have some foreign from outside of the US and Canada colleagues as well, but especially in the US, that number is 1.8 million donors. And at the same time, trust in nonprofits is at an all-time low. This is from the Edelman Trust Index that's published annually. So what this means is that people trust businesses and governments to do a better job at solving problems than nonprofits. So that's really frightening and frustrating. And The element here that I want you to be mindful of is that, every time I do this presentation, whether it's live or online, there isn't a hand that doesn't go up when we talk about, are you interested in younger donors? Now, of course, younger donors are more digital natives and they're more inclined to function in an online universe. But I don't want us to ignore older donors and donors that have been with us for a long time, particularly those that have more free cash to be able to spend on philanthropic endeavors, to give to your organizations. But as those people age and either pass away or shift their wealth to younger demographics, we really need to be mindful of cultivating that next generation of philanthropy. So what ends up happening in this world is that we're in right now is siloed data from one place is not accessible from another place, and that ultimately means that we have poor targeting. We can't talk to donors as prospective donors or existing donors in the best way possible. And I know that many of you are, or all of you are smart, capable, and good, and you're not doing things like dear donor or dear friend. You are trying your best to say dear Wendy or dear Debbie or dear Cherian or whatever in your marketing materials. And so I know that you're doing work in terms of personalization. However, when it comes to true personalization, we're missing the mark as a sector. And I say that as someone who's done this several times, where we've drafted an email or a newsletter or something like that, and we do the automation of personalization because our tools can do that. But are we really, really focused on what that donor's journey has been with our organization? Are we providing information to them that's unique to their place in the donor journey? Meaning, if they're not a donor, are we talking to them differently than someone who is a donor? If they're a first-time donor, we know that they are very precious. They're very susceptible to not giving again. And so are we treating those first-time donors differently than our second or third year donors? Are we treating our legacy, our planned giving donors differently from our major gift donors, differently from our introductory level donors or our monthly donors? All of those types of things lend themselves to even better personalization. The example that I'll give you is that when I log into Netflix, it says, because you liked Blacklist, here are some other shows that we think that you would like. And the algorithm is designed to show me things that they think that I would like. And my guess is that if Wendy logs into her Netflix right now, or if any of you log into your Netflix, even if you've watched Blacklist, it's slightly different. You're going to see something a little bit different than what I would see. Now, we're not Netflix, and we shouldn't necessarily aspire to be Netflix, but can we do an even better job with more data, better targeting, better personalization to provide a unique and more meaningful experience to our donors? And so that's the problem that we call the fundraising blind spot that we're now in. And one of the ramifications of that fundraising blind spot is that we're at the lowest donor retention rate of all time, meaning that if a donor gave to us in 2023, less than 50%, 40-some% of those donors will give again in 2024. Now, that's on average. Your organization may be different. And tools like QGive and Bloomerang give you an immediate understanding of what your donor retention rate is. But as I mentioned, each different channel or experience that donor journey may be very, very different for your organization. So first-time donor retention rates are really, really low, less than 20%. Multi-year donors might be really high, or monthly giving donors might be really high. When you average that out, it's about 40%. But your organization would need to get a sense of what that donor retention looks like. I mentioned a growth in nonprofits. It's an 81% increase in nonprofits in the US and Canada since 2000, in the US at least, since 2000. Fundraising revenue has been decreasing. The number of household giving has decreased. And the same time, the number of millennial households who have given are increasing relative to Generation X and boomers. We can unpack that study, and this is relatively recent, but there's a lot here to unpack around younger donors and their giving habits and how they want to engage. But ultimately, 54% of millennials would give more if they were approached in a different way. While 7% of organizations, only 7%, see themselves as highly effective in building relationships with current mid-level donors, 3% of fundraisers like us have confidence in their ability to engage those introductory level donors who would become mid-level donors. So we are self-aware, and my guess is that hundreds of you are on this call today because you are likely saying, we're not sure what's happening with all of what's happening in AI and what this means for our organization, but we have real problems when it comes to engaging our donors. Most of you, certainly almost all of you, probably are using email marketing, but the underlying kind of component that I'm seeing every time that I talk to small groups of nonprofits, large groups of nonprofits, or individual nonprofit organizations is that they're feeling stressed and understaffed, and there are open positions that aren't filled, and these unrealistic fundraising goals that's the context that we're in. And so technology comes in and says, everybody needs to use AI. Everybody needs to, if you don't use AI, you'll be left behind. And this is what everyone's doing. And you should be on this webinar because Cherian's going to tell you how to do that. Now, I'm going to dispel that notion first and foremost. I'm not here to tell you that you should use AI, nor am I going to say that you're going to be left behind. I don't want us to get to a race to the bottom in terms of trying to use AI unthoughtfully or in an unintentional way, just to say, like, let's all use ChatGPT, for example. What I think is really important is addressing these issues that are systemic and potentially existential to our sector. Is AI coming for our jobs? Is this going to put fundraisers out of work? What's going to happen to nonprofits, and how are funders going to adapt to that? So my view of AI, and this is really just my view, is that AI has a tremendous ability to make the work that we do that we don't love doing, the work that is mundane, that can be automated, faster and easier for us to do. And so I love this quote from Robin Bordoli, who says that AI is not about replacing humans with machines, but machines augmenting humans. And that has been the case for our organizations for decades. I am fundraising old enough to remember one of my first jobs was to go find typewriter ribbon so that our people could enter donor records onto note cards about when this person gave or when they became a member or whatever. So technology has come a long way. And if you think about it from that perspective, does the introduction of word processing and computers help us do our work? Absolutely. Does the use of email help us do our work? Absolutely. Do Excel spreadsheets help us do our work? Now, we shouldn't rely exclusively on spreadsheets, especially for donor data. If that's you, then we need to have a separate conversation. But the idea that we would not have technology play a part of the work that we do is probably absurd. Everyone, I mean, you're all on a Zoom call right now. So we all know how technology helps us. We need to be mindful of making sure that technology has its appropriate place. And ultimately, when it comes to AI, here's the thing that I want to stress to you. You don't have to use AI inside of your organization to do your fundraising work or other work inside of your nonprofit. But you do need to recognize that AI is an issue, a technology that is transforming the world around you. It's transforming how other people do their work, and it's impacting your stakeholders, meaning every donor is being impacted by an algorithm, whether it's on their social media or in their digital tools, whether it's in just their day-to-day life. And that's true of your donors, your volunteers, your community members, and everyone like that. So what I'm hoping to get out of this conversation is for you to feel more comfortable with understanding what all is out there. How can this maybe play a part in the work that we're doing, but how can I learn even more about what this looks like? So with that in mind, let's talk about the elephant in the room, which is ChatGPT, which is actually ChatGPT 4.0, as in the letter O right now. Now, you're undoubtedly all familiar with this tool, but the reason why you're familiar with this tool, the reason why you're probably all on this webinar in some way, shape, or form is because of billions and billions of dollars of investment by Microsoft to make this accessible to everyone. So the cool thing that Microsoft has done, which I would say is cool in both positive and negative terms, is that they've spent so much money to make this something that exists for everyone, that's accessible for everyone with a computer or a cell phone or whatever. But the Chat GPT seems to have taken a hold of our kind of conversations generally, but particularly in the nonprofit sector, we're super focused on what does Chat GPT do for fundraising? And in reality, what I would suggest to you is that if you can see this slide, there's a little icon under GPT that really reinforces that Chat GPT is one of a few generative pre-trained transformers. There are multiple ones. There's a dozen or more large language models that are out there that are formed into generative pre-trained transformers. You don't need to know what that is or what that means at this point. I'll show you some examples in a bit. But ChatGPT is one of those that sits under large language models, that sits around natural language processing. Some of those aren't just around text. Some of them are around data and images and things like that, which is all part of this idea of generative AI, which is part of this larger issue of deep learning and machine learning and artificial intelligence. So one takeaway that I want you to have is that this isn't about Chat GPT. And in fact, I'm not even going to talk about Chat GPT or prompt engineering or anything like that. If that's what you're hoping for, there are lots of courses out there, particularly really well-developed courses like on Coursera around prompt engineering. The thing that I would remind you of, and this is from the experts, and from my previous webinars with QGive, I'm going to give you the source citations, and again, you'll have access to these slides. But the experts are saying that optimizing for prompts is a fool's errand. And what they mean by that is, first and foremost, it's a job that's better left to machines. There's tools that can do that for you. But anytime you get to the point where a prompt is, for example, I wouldn't buy a prompt cookbook, a prompt engineering cookbook for fundraising, because it's only going to work with one particular model, like ChatGPT, until they change the model. So all of the 3.5 prompts don't work as well under 4, and certainly don't work as well under 4.0 that just came out a week or two ago. And then that's going to continue to be the case. But ultimately, when you think about how AI works, it's a bucket full of stuff, right? They've scraped the web and they've dumped all of this information into a bucket. And then when you ask it a prompt, you're hoping that it gives you exactly what you want. But that's not how particularly how ChatGPT wants you to interact with it. It wants you to be more conversational, not give you the right answer, the precise right answer the first time, but have you continue to improve and iterate on the outcome. And so as you put in your information, your organization information, that response is going to look different, just like it does for Netflix. Remember, Wendy's Netflix recommendations look very different from Debbie's, from mine, from other people's. And that's what's going to happen with ChatGPT. So your expectation of what you want out of a prompt is going to look very, very different than some of the other 100-some organizations here. So it's really about coaching the model to get you what you want over time, but not to feel like it's a genie that will give you the right answer every single time. The other piece of this, remember that Microsoft has spent a lot of money kind of coaxing us to make this accessible. But back in 1997, Gary Kasparov lost to a computer. So, decades ago, there was this idea of computers doing some things better than humans. And then a dark day in my kind of personal history was in 2011. That was the day that Ken Jennings lost to IBM Watson on Jeopardy. Now, really fun fact, Ken Jennings lost his last time on my birthday. So it was a really sad day for me personally. But the actual fun fact is that IBM Watson got the answer to Final Jeopardy wrong. It was the Toronto airport, and Watson guessed something else. I don't remember what it was. But the point is that it could beat humans at answering questions so regularly that even the greatest players like Ken Jennings or Brad Rutter lost to a computer in that aspect. So we've been pretty comfortable with this for a reasonable amount of time. But then in February of 2023, 12 years later, Microsoft dumped all of this money, and well, before that, they dumped all of this money onto ChatGPT to make it accessible, but then started integrating it into tools like emails, slideshows, spreadsheets. And you're seeing that now. You can add Copilot to Microsoft Word today, and it can help you write things immediately. But what I want you to be kind of thoughtful of and potentially nervous about is the idea that anytime you use your devices and anytime your stakeholders use their devices, they are utilizing AI in some ways, and that's going to continue to grow. So every time I take a picture on my phone, it categorizes those pictures based upon AI. So it knows who my kids are, it knows who my wife is, who my dog is, my nephews, my friends. And the thing that I don't put on this slide is that anytime I take pictures, like my son had a choir concert a couple of weeks ago, and he stands next to the same girl in choir every single time. So it knows who that girl is. It knows who Harper is. And so this is an interesting aspect. I'm doing a talk on AI and images later this week as well. This is something that we should be that's cool from a certain perspective because we can categorize information and photos, but it should also start to raise some red flags for us about image recognition or facial recognition and what that means for our society in general. I love this picture of it's a Star Trek movie from the 80s where they go back in time to the 80s. They're from the 24th century. They come back in time to the 1980s, and this guy picks up an Apple IIe mouse and says, "Computer, computer." And this guy, when in the tie, looks at him like he has four heads because he's like, "What are you doing? That's not how this works." But we're so comfortable with using technology and framing and the idea that we would say, "Okay, Google," or "Hey, Siri," everybody's phones go off, and we're just so comfortable with that I want to remind you of that Asimov quote that says that any sufficiently advanced technology seems like magic. So this is just the next phase of what we're going through. It's not something that you need to be overly worried about in terms of how it's being used in your organization. I would be cautious about it. We'll talk about that. But I want to get into the useful aspects of what this means for your organization in three ways. One, in terms of chatbots, and second, in terms of content, and third, in terms of communications. And I'm going to give you some examples of that. Again, you'll have access to slides, and you can follow up on this as you see what's useful for your organization. Hundreds of organizations here. It might be appropriate for some or others. So on my website, I actually sent an email to Dr. Russell James. Many of you know that he's kind of the preeminent scholar in planned giving. And I love his work. I've read a lot of what he's done, but I haven't read everything. So I called him up and I said, "Hey, can I make you immortal?" And he laughed and he said, "What do you mean?" And I said, "Can I take all the research that you've given me and put it into a chatbot so I can just ask the chatbot questions?" And he's like, "Yeah, absolutely." So I've created a Russell James chatbot based upon all of his research, and you can just ask it a question like, "How should I start a planned giving program? What is the best way to ask for a gift in wills? What is the best way to ask for a charitable gift annuity?" All of those things based on his research, and it will share with you the research so that you can go follow up with it. So I want to challenge you to start thinking about, what does this mean for your organization in two ways, internally and externally? So for example, I do this kind of talk with large organizations like universities all over the world. And I went to a university and I said, and I took their information with permission, and I said, "Who knows that your IRS EIN number for if someone were to make a gift of stock or won a tax receipt or whatever?" And a few people raised their hands, and I said, "Look, pull up the chatbot," and they could answer, the donor could answer that, get the answer to that question immediately without having to scroll or do a search or anything like that. "What's the tax ID number?" And it provided that information. We've reduced friction. We've done so with non-sensitive information. So if you were going to do that at a university with student information, that would be a different problem that you would have to address. But there's external facing elements of answering questions for your stakeholders, whether they're donors or not. But then there are also internal use cases. Imagine things like loading up your workplace policies, things like HR policies. Like, how much vacation do I have every year? I would have to read the manual. I don't even know what the answer is for my company. And I would need to go look for the answer to that. And this would answer those questions. Now imagine that being used for onboarding for new staff members. And hopefully now you're starting to see, how does this make us just a little bit less stressed out, a little bit less burnt out, because we're not wasting time doing the things that the robots are actually better at. I've even talked to boards about doing this for their board material, putting all of their old board material into a bot and then allowing you to ask questions. What was this discussion about? Why did we make this decision 20 years ago? And if the information is there, it will surface up that information. So I want a deeper dive on content and communications, because I think that's what you all are maybe here for. So let's start with fundraising and sort of those external pieces. Now, I want to focus on things that are human assisted, and those are the checkboxes here. I like the ask, thank, report, repeat model. So when it comes to fundraising appeals, can we create first drafts of entire campaigns? And as we talked about before, create segmentation and customization using the data-driven insights that we have from our CRM, and then create versions of that so imagine, for example, as I said before, we now have a entire campaign for monthly giving, some for prospective donors, some for existing one-time donors who have given for a short amount of time, some for existing one-time donors who have given for multiple years, and we want to convert them to monthly donors. We can absolutely do that through AI. We've now created that segmentation of this very simple segmentation of 3 different audiences. Could we do that as humans? Absolutely. But can we take the AI generated content and do that just a little bit quicker so that we can customize it and augment it based upon our own lived and learned experience? Absolutely. And now can we take the fundraising, let's say you wrote a direct mail letter using AI. You've now zhuzhed it up to kind of approximate what you want, and you feel good about that letter. Now can you upload that and create versions of that for email, for social media, so that there's an omni-channel approach? Absolutely. I'll show you some examples of how to do that in a general sense. But remember, this doesn't need to be like a one-shot done and dusted kind of thing. You can keep working on that, even if it takes you 15 minutes to work through that stuff, and then go back and add your content and whatnot through that. It takes you quite a bit less time to create that content and ultimately deploy it than it would if you were doing it by yourself. Then one of the things that I see a lot, particularly oddly in larger organizations, but this has happened to me as well, where I look back at the file and then I see we have customized a thank you note to say, "Dear Cherian," or "Dear Mark," or "Dear Susan," but the letter itself is exactly the same. And we've used data automation to change the amount and the date, but it's the same thank you letter. And I've actually now dealt with organizations where the donor has said, "Hey, I got the same thank you letter 2 years in a row or 5 years in a row." Do we think that that engenders loyalty and trust and engagement? Probably not. So how can we take mail merge and optimize that to say, "Hey, you've given for 7 years, and this is a unique thank you letter that you can then," whether you handwrite it or you do your mail merge thing and you send it out, creating that gratitude moment quickly has now become even easier, but doing it in a more customized way has become a lot easier. Even again, if it takes you a few minutes to update that information to make it even better, that's great. The other thing I'm excited about is using things like interview notes or recordings to convert powerful stories into something that's concise, that's powerful for your reporting purposes, to share how those dollars were used so that you can do so in a timely manner, and again, generate different versions of that. So people are seeing it on social media, they're seeing it in their inbox, maybe they're seeing a cheap and cheerful postcard as a result of that, so that you can create that unique content. Now, regardless of how you take the notes, whether it's a note taker like Debbie and Tiffany have here in the session right now, or if you're using something like handwritten notes, it doesn't really matter, because AI can help create a story based upon your notes. And that first draft helps you to then optimize it for your purposes. Now, I talked about fundraising. I want to talk briefly about how this would be used inside of your organization for process. And I'm going to go deeper into this when it comes to non-fundraising tasks on Thursday. So if you are enjoying this webinar and what we'll talk about in a moment, what I'd love for you to do, obviously get the recording, share it with whoever you need in the slides, but I would encourage you to talk to your other teammates who don't do fundraising. Encourage them to come to the webinar on Thursday, where we'll talk more about process documentation and some of these other things, about data, about volunteer engagement, program delivery. These are all really great opportunities to engage the expanse of your organization in what the technology can do. But briefly for you to kind of give you a sense of what this can be, what this can do. Every time I've walked into a fundraising shop, I've had to do what I call fundraising archaeology, understanding what our policies were, what did we do, and a lot of times there weren't policies or process. So can we create like gift acceptance policies, but even like gift entry policies? And things like that. I mentioned the chatbot example. How, if someone needed to know what is the minimum for a charitable gift annuity in your organization, where would they find that information, or how long would it take them to find that information? Would it be easier to enter into a chatbot, what is our minimum for a charitable gift annuity? Or what do we do with a gift that arrives in the mail after December 31st. And so from an onboarding perspective, to create those knowledge bases where anyone can ask those questions, I find that to be tremendously helpful and an opportunity for lots of different roles in an organization. When it comes to project management, the idea of AI creating resource allocations and timelines to be able to say, hey, what haven't I thought about with this event? Or what haven't I thought about with this gala that I should be addressing? And being able to have this sort of sidekick that comes alongside you and says, hey, have you thought about this? Have you addressed this thing? And doing so from a, really using your lived experience to say, here are some questions that I might ask. The last thing that I want to talk about is data analytics and business intelligence. Now, I didn't go to school to be a data analyst, but I feel like a lot of times in fundraising, you have to understand how to pull reports and do reports. QGIve and Bloomerang are really great because they have these preset reports, but sometimes you need to have like more data pulled into different pieces to be able to create a really robust report. And if you're not on those platforms and you don't have a pre-canned report, sometimes you have to send in a form and say, these are the things that I need. And I don't know anything about SQL, and maybe you do, but maybe you don't. The idea to be able to chat with your data, to be able to ask it questions and provide that insight in real time is really, really cool. So let me show you some of these things in real time. I want to highlight for you that all of these resources will be like every website will be on the slide deck. So I'm going to share with you what it is, but I know people are like taking pictures and things like that. Don't necessarily worry about that piece. You'll have access to all of these. So we're going to start with, there are a few of you that have shared your tool in the chat. You're using Otter, which is a great tool. I used to use Otter as well. I like Fireflies. It joins all of my meetings, and it enables me to then go back and listen to the transcript. So I think it's actually on this call as well. So I'll get that one. But let's say, for example, this is a group of people who are going for their ACFRE. If you don't know what that is, it doesn't necessarily matter. But I can look at the overview of the conversation and who was in that conversation, the notes for the next meeting, action items around that, a whole outline, and then you can jump directly to that spot in the transcript and listen to the conversation. The other thing that I love is being able to ask it questions. So it has preloaded some questions based upon the conversation, but you can then ask it any questions, like, whatever you want. I've used this in a number of different instances. I'm going to share with you two examples. One is with job interviews. I've just said, hey, do you mind if my robot note taker is on here so I can focus on the conversation with you? And then I'm not down here taking notes for my HR team for the form that I have to fill out. I found it to be a much more robust conversation. And then I can say, what were the strengths whatever here, and it will provide an answer to that. The other thing that I've used it for on numerous occasions is donor conversations. So I'm not going to pull up a real donor conversation because that's private, but I've never had a donor say, no, I don't want you to do it. All of them have been like super intrigued. They've even asked, like, can I get a copy of it? And so whether it's institutional funders or individual donors, the ability to record those conversations, include that as a contact report in your data, in your CRM, sorry, but then be able to come back and ask questions. So I was working in a workforce development nonprofit recently and had a conversation with a funder. I forgot what they described as systems change. And I was able to say, how did this person describe systems change? And it, sure enough, answered that question for me, provided a link to that section of the call. If this is something that doesn't make sense for you externally, that's fine. If you follow your values, follow your process for doing that. I've used Otter and now use Fireflies for internal meetings as well, where if a team member is gone, they're able to access that information, what we discussed, and they can, if they're in another meeting or they're just sick that day, it's been super helpful. Both Otter and Fireflies have apps that you can use, so you can record in real time, but you can also use it, in Zoom calls and whatnot. I find it super helpful to kind of navigate, like, what were the action items out of those meetings. I mentioned to you, and again, all of these websites will be available to you, so don't freak out about me not staying on each of them for a really long time. But I really love Claude as an alternative to ChatGPT for a couple of reasons. If you use ChatGPT, that's fine. If you use the free version, the paid version, this isn't a sales pitch. I'm just sharing with you tools that I use, and maybe they'll be helpful for you in the context of what I do. So Claude is different than ChatGPT because of how much information you can put into the context of how it's answering those questions. So one example of that is, these are fake contact reports, but imagine, for example, if you stripped out the personal identifiable information from a contact report, loaded them in here, you could do years or, whatever, decades of contact reports. It'll take it all. And then establishing the connection between the data and the contact reports to summarize the donor's relationship with your organization. So that's one example of using that. But I've even used it for articles that are too long to read. And I'm trying to think of what an example of that would be. I don't know, but the point is that you can upload a really, really long piece of content. So you can put like 10, those are my pictures, but you can upload, you'll see here, upload documents, a max of 5 or 10 megabytes each. So it's a much bigger thing that you can ask it questions of. The other cool thing that it's not showing you here, there it is, transcribe handwritten notes. So let's say, for example, you're taking notes by pen and paper, which is really good for memory. Actually, you should do that. Let's say you do that with a donor meeting or a stakeholder interview that you're doing with a person that your organization serves. You take those notes by hand. You can upload the picture and transcribe it in Claude, which I think is super cool. Imagine that externally, but also internally for the purposes of things like team meetings, and you have those Post-it notes on the walls and whatever, it will transcribe all of that. I've used that a number of times, and it's super, super helpful. There is Claude has a paid version that's similar to the cost of ChatGPT. So throwing that out there as part of that as well. So Janet, one quick question around the language question. These are writing natively in information based upon information that they've scraped. So it's not like Google Translate where it's taking English to Spanish or Spanish to English, and then you get like Pepsi's tagline, the Generations one saying, "We'll bring your ancestors back from the dead." This is actually writing in native language. Now, it's not going to be perfect, but it's quite a few languages that are supported. Each platform is going to be a little different. Paula, I want to address your question at the end of the robot petting zoo. So if I forget, please remind me, but it's a really, really important question. So I'll come back to that in a moment. The next thing that I wanted to mention is this tool called Accio, like Harry Potter. Again, these are not like these are ones that I use. There's no affiliate agreement or anything like that. There should be, but there isn't. These are ones that I find really helpful. And remember, I talked about chatting with data. So this is a SOC 2 compliant environment. So it's a secure environment. Even then, you might decide that you're going to only use constituent ID and eliminate personal identifiable information. You can do that and then upload your data. You can also go in here and say, remove all personal identifiable information. I even spelled that wrong, but it's going to do it, which is really cool. So you can ask it a bunch of questions around the data and transform the data. So for example, if you have bad data, like say, for example, you have salutations in your data file and you want to remove that from the first name file, you just tell it remove salutations and it will go through and it will highlight that. And then it's understanding what I'm doing. So it'll say, it's highlighted all of the PII in this data. You'll see the different colors from that. And you can choose which ones you want or which ones you don't. I actually had salutations in the first name field and I accidentally hit apply transform. So it doesn't change the underlying data, but I can't go back to that version. So those are options there around kind of cleaning up your data. Again, this is fake data. But the other thing that I wanted to mention was, being able to chat with your data and get answers to this question. I've shown this to like large universities and they're like, yes, the IT folks are like, we need this because we don't want to we're spending too much time running reports for each individual fundraiser. So let's say, for example, I've already done this before. What's the donor retention rate? And so it'll give you the approach and then it will give you the donor retention rate. Again, this is fake data, but the idea of being able to ask it these questions and have an answer in a moment is super, super cool. And it really just does take a second. So I created a bar chart here. I just asked it like, make a bar chart of gift count by state. And so it gave me the AI interpretation, then it gave me the gift count by state, and apparently New Jersey's doing really well in my fake data set. And then I asked it the average gift in 2018, and it was $1,128. So this isn't going to necessarily solve all of your data problems, but it's super, super cool to be able to have this. And there's a free version of this and a paid version of this. If you are interested in real information that's on the web, so some people are worried about accuracy and hallucinations, I would kind of come back to the point is that this is things like ChatGPT and even Claude are really helpful in generating those first drafts, not in terms of like getting direct information around what's immediately happening. But if that's useful, and apparently this is really helpful for Paula as well, Perplexity is your place to go. So if you want academic research on anything, so I did donor journeys and journey mapping, it will find those sources for you. You can go directly to those sources. I did a session on philanthropic advising as a profession, so I wanted to find those sources. It's quite a bit better than Google search, although Google search also does do some of these pieces as well. So almost all of these have a free version and a paid version, Sarah, so for that purpose. So it gives you an overall answer, but then it will cite sources as part of that, and then you can go into the source citations as well. This is the one that I created that I'm super proud of, so I'm just going to very quickly show you. When I was working in a nonprofit, we weren't able to keep up. It was the pandemic. We had lost a bunch of staff. And so I created a bunch of different use cases for nonprofits. So for those of you who are in fundraising, we've got a fundraising appeal for everything. You just type in what you're raising money for and it produces an appeal. But then all those things like, for example, a job description or an onboarding guide, it will do all of those. Fun fact is that it will write in the voice of your nonprofit. So you can turn on the brand voice and edit your own brand voice, which is really neat. And then you're able to edit that when your organization changes, but you can also do it by donor persona. So you can create multiple donor personas that are out there if you want. It also has, it saves all of your content, so you can search that content as you go through it. So if you produce something today that you might need 6 months from now, you can go into my results and edit it or find it or whatever. If you do any video content, Descript is the one that I use. I don't think that they have a free version, but as you noticed from just this conversation, I say a lot. I've had a public speaking coach since I was 13. she wasn't able to beat it out of me. It's not going to happen. But if you make video, and as I do on occasion, but if your organization does this a lot, you can just play this video. I'm not going to do it now. It's 3 minutes. It's magic. It will go in and take out all of the ums and ahs. And it's a really, it's super cool. I love it. I think it's really awesome. And so then this is one that I don't necessarily recommend per se. I want to be really clear that I'm not suggesting that you use this, but this is really just to demonstrate the possibilities of what AI can do today that will be possible in the future. So Durable is a company that just does it super fast. So let's say we want to do meals. I saw someone was from Meals on Wheels. So apologies. I'm just going to put in nonprofit just in case it doesn't know what this is, but I'm not suggesting, and I'm in Las Vegas, so it knows that, and we're just going to call it Meals on Wheels. It will generate the website in 30 seconds. Is this a great website? Absolutely not. That's what I'm saying. I wouldn't necessarily recommend that, but look at this, like already support our community meals, donate now. You can edit these sections. This is really full, like it pulled some wrong pictures, but there's some pieces here that are really, really good. Some that are just terrible. Daily meal delivery, wellness checks, you get the idea. It's really kind of neat around what it can do. So now imagine you need to rebuild your website. How long and how expensive will this process take? Not so much. I don't really remember how much this costs, but it's not super expensive, especially when you think about the cost of web design and whatever. So those are some examples of what's out there. One of the things that I would have you do immediately after the session is over, hopefully this is inspiring and you like, what you saw, but this is a few of them that I use when I work with nonprofits or when I talk to nonprofits. I would suggest to you that you spend some time thinking about what are the tasks that you spend a lot of time doing, the tasks that you hate doing, and then use this website called whataicandotoday.com and ask it, is there an AI tool for this? And it will share with you some of those AI tools that are out there so that you can start to find what are those, what are the ones that make sense, or maybe I'm going to try that out. If you feel overwhelmed right now because you're like so many tools and so much to learn, I get that too, because there's so many tools and so much to do. I mean, there's like 5,600 AI tools in this website alone. Here's my recommendation. Anytopic.io will create an AI generated audiobook. So while you're working out, while you're taking a walk, while you're washing the dishes or taking the kids to whatever, it will teach you whatever you want. It will teach you about fundraising. It will teach you about donor journeys. It'll teach you about AI in nonprofits. That's the one that I get regularly. And it'll update it. So it's really, really cool. I think it's really fun that you can learn, and you can learn about, stamp collecting if you want to too. So you can be a whole person in this process. I'm going to finish up. So all of the resources are here. You'll get the slides, but I want to finish up by talking about ethics and AI. Just briefly, as I mentioned before, there are lots of ethical considerations here. And one of the questions that was raised in the chat was about privacy. And I want to be really clear about donor data and privacy. There are people who are sharing the idea of saying you should put your donor data into ChatGPT. In unequivocal terms, I want to be really clear with you. Never, ever, 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 ever put donor data into any sort of publicly accessible LLM. Not ChatGPT, not Claude, not Llama, not Gemini, not any of them. Do not put private data in a place where you don't already store private data. So if you have a CRM where there's private data and there is a compliant system that where privacy has been vetted and ensured inside of that system, like inside of your CRM, you're keeping private donor data. That's an absolute clear place where you can use AI, depending on the tools, right? Of course, and making sure it's vetted. That's a place where you can use AI. Do not download your Bloomerang or QGIve database and upload it into ChatGPT. Will it give you good answers? Absolutely. It will actually do that. But the ability to pull that information, not really well, which isn't the point, but the ability to pull that information can occur. There are academic studies that say that you can reveal personal identifiable information. Will they know that they donated to your organization, to the Children's Museum in Providence? No, they won't. There's too much data in there for them to figure it out. But revealing that information is problematic, and transferring that information over an open network is also problematic. So private data should stay in SOC 2 compliant places where the data is secure, and that's where you can use some of the data pieces. So be very careful and cautious about that. That doesn't relate to anything like writing an appeal necessarily. So when people talk about transparency and whatnot about like writing a fundraising appeal, you could have 4 consultants that write the fundraising appeal and not disclose that 4 consultants did it. You could have 4 people on your team do it and not have to disclose that. So I want to be very careful about that. But here's the thing that I want you to remember. You all are good, capable, and smart. You are going to use AI in the right way for the right purposes. But based upon what's happening in the sector, you may be inclined to go experiment with the tools that I've shared or the ones that you find and try it out. And I want you to be very cautious about doing that. I'm encouraging you to pause. Don't go play around with the tool before you have an AI governance policy that says, here are the things that we can do, here are the things that we can't do. And number 1 on the can't do is the PII in public tools. But there are a lot of other considerations that you have to work through. And one of those, all of these examples of fake images, which I'm going to talk about in a different webinar, is a big concern, particularly around, untoward actors trying to affect your organization. I talked about trust being an issue in nonprofits, being low in nonprofits currently. But the interesting thing about trust is it's a bucket that can be emptied for you. It's a bucket that can be emptied for you, meaning that if someone fakes out you and encourages you to share a password or share data or to buy gift cards, it's not just a random email now that's very clearly fake and asking for you to send gift cards or send a payment or something like that. They can deep fake a picture, they can deep fake a Zoom call. I promise I'm real, but like they can do all of those things in a way that could adversely affect your organization, and that's front page news. So today, before you do anything else with AI, start the conversation about AI governance, absolutely, but start talking about how do you protect yourself from bad actors in the space, because it's no longer some, prince from the middle of nowhere who's trying to get you to navigate a, $1 million inheritance. It can seem like your boss. It can seem like a board member. I've already gotten those emails personally, but there's lots of challenges. I'm going to end with an example of where I see this going, and then we'll take questions. I know there's lots of discussion in the chat. I'm happy to stay a little bit longer as well. But one of the things, I don't want to end on a bad note. I think there's lots of opportunity when used properly, but you do need to protect yourself as individuals, as organizations. That's absolutely true for your individual life as well. Like the spoof calls are like, hey, grandma, I'm in a prison. I need you to wire $1,000. And it sounds like the grandson because they've cloned the voice. So that's freaky and dangerous. But here's the positive note. We now have the ability to be able to combine all of this data and be able to use AI in a really meaningful way. So say, for example, you have new donors with high potential, but you don't know who they are. It takes you a long time to engage with them. Imagine someone coming to a golf tournament or to a gala or to receive services from your organization, like they buy a ticket to an arts festival or something like that. They provide you with enough information for you to get external data that's publicly available that identifies for you, hey, they've got a lot of capacity, they give to a lot of other organizations like yours. This would be someone that we would want to connect with. And it drafts out like a set of tasks. Email them, call them, send them a thank you note. And it even produces that script for you to say, Hey, Mrs. Williams, hope this letter finds you well. We'd love to meet with you or talk with you depending on their relationship, but it'll build a phone call script for you and be able to produce all of that. So I want to end my discussion with not saying it's all good or it's all bad, but to realize that there are places where technology as it lives right now, things like emails and creating data and uploading data and scheduling calls, create a bunch of burnout, and it makes us frustrated. We're not doing the job that we love to do, that we want to do. So how can we think about AI and automation? Again, coming back to the beginning, building in infrastructure inside of our organization so that we can do our best work, the work that brings us joy, that gets us out of bed saying, this is what I want to do, work with teammates, work with stakeholders, meeting with donors, whatever it might be, that allows us to actually love fundraising again and enjoy our teammates and eliminate miscommunication and all of those things. There's some time here for us to answer questions. I'm going to hang out for as long as we can to answer those questions as well. But some questions are not appropriate to ask in a public forum, and I get that. So if you want to reach out to me, I'm happy to answer those questions privately. Would love to connect with you as well. And then, of course, there are more webinars that are coming. So if you want to think about sharing this with teammates or talking about other subjects, I'd love to stay in touch with you. I'm going to leave this because we're running out of time, but once you get the slide deck, I'd love for you to take a look at this as well. So with that in mind, it's the last slide in there, but I want to answer some of these questions around that are in the chat as well. So I think we answered the privacy question. Hopefully we've addressed that and we've got some of that done. So Katie says you're starting a fundraising advancement division and you've got Google Workspace, Calendly. What platforms do you recommend as you consider on CRM reports and whatnot? So, I mean, you've got QGive already. I think Bloomerang is a good connected solution for you when it comes to CRM and reporting that's sort of baked in. That's not right for everyone, of course, but there's obviously, you know, given your starting point with QGive, that's where I would start. But your circumstance is going to be very unique to you. So I would, you know, continue to look at what your organization does and what you need for your piece there. Janet, your question is upload the information and ask it to remove personal. Absolutely. You can do that with donor profiles. So if you have like a dossier that you've put together yourself, or you've downloaded one from like iWave or something like that, you can have it remove PII and then use it. You can also take the data set to pull that out as well. So Debbie's Otter has takeaways from the meeting, and so does Tavares's. That's great. So those are fun pieces there. I'll let you all talk about CRMs as well. Jenna, it means personal identifiable information, as Wendy mentioned there. So we want to be very careful about that as well. Elko, one thing that I would say about the AI usage policy is that you want to build that from scratch. Ultimately, we want to be very careful around just plugging and playing someone else's AI policy. For gift acceptance, it can generally work and you won't have a lot of problems as long as you're checking the numbers and things like that. But I want to be mindful about being thoughtful about our ethics and our values inside of the organization. So just do that properly around there. Paula, around your question about resistance, yeah, absolutely, that's an issue. This is really a change management issue. The thing that I would say around personal meetings, I've used tape recorders in the past, or personal notes. So the difference there is being really mindful of kind of where it's just a different version of the technology. But the thing that I would remind you of is that things like Slack and Zoom have gotten in trouble for using the information that we have in our meetings to train LLMs. So it's out there, right? It's being used. So it's really about setting the right bar for your organization, which is why I'm trying to say there are pros and cons, and you want to be mindful of each of those and trying to think about what are the ways in which it makes sense for your organization. I would say the the change management process is true of any sort of technology, like moving from paper to a CRM or from one CRM to another is a whole bit around kind of thinking through those different pieces. And what I would say, this isn't a webinar about change management, but this has come up a few different times in different questions. That the idea here is really around saying, like, what are some cases where everybody wins or a lot of people win around this task? And so transcription, like to Katie's question around Otter, the idea of like recording internal meetings and using them for internal knowledge, like that's something that's really standard in the corporate world. Like internal meetings or external meetings, right? Like this call is being recorded for quality assurance purposes. We're all sort of comfortable with that. And sometimes they tell you, sometimes they don't, but talking about how something really straightforward and simple can benefit your organization, and really enhance the work that we do is where I would start. Start small, grow that piece to be able to prove out its benefits, and then build in encouragement. So like if one thing doesn't work, don't feel like that's the ultimate discouragement. Try something else and say, okay, what's the big problem that we have in our organization? And how can we fix that problem once and with one tool, and trying to address that as part of that. So as you think about that piece, there's more to talk about with change management, but at least for now, that's how I would approach it. Yes, Amy, this is approved for CFRE. And so, and if you want to talk about acquiring that certification, I'd be happy to chat more about that. I start the CFRE refresher course next week. So it's really important to me, especially as we start to think about calibrating all of this technological knowledge that we have with the lens of good fundraising practices, and making sure that we as good practitioners hold the robots accountable. So that's where I will leave you with is thank you again for being here. It's really important that you are here. And I don't mean that in some sort of platitude way. What's really important is that when the robots have free reign over doing whatever, the robots don't know what nonprofit best practices are. They don't know how to apply things ethically. You are the ones through this type of professional development that will be able to inform best practices when adopting or implementing AI and correcting AI in the future. You are the human in the loop. So thank you for the work that you're doing right now to govern that, whether you choose to use AI or not. Thank you for this time that you've spent to understand what's out there, even if you decide not to use it, to understand what's out there and say, this is what fits, this is what doesn't fit, and here's how we're going to govern AI ethically and responsibly for the future. I hope to see you on Thursday for the Bloomerang webinar, or your colleagues. But if there's another thing that I can be helpful with, if I can be a resource for you in any way, please feel free to reach out. Thank you again for being here.
Cherian, thank you so much. That was super fun. You are so generous with your time and sharing your knowledge with our audience. So thank you, thank you, thank you. That was awesome. I know I have a lot of tools that I want to go check out after this. Thank you again. And thank you everyone for attending as always. And we will see you in the next webinar. Have a great day, everyone.
Bye-bye. Thank you.